Okay, so thank you, Rasmus. So we've evolved from thoughtful procurement here into some fairly sophisticated data analysis. And I think, you know, what this points to is the evolving nature of the business that we're all involved with now. So we've been doing events for quite a long time, some years. We know that it makes sense to be gentle with people in the afternoon. So we have a networking session now this afternoon for half an hour or so. And then when we come back, I'd probably be billing this as the main event. We have the IMEF standard that we are going to with this debate officially launch here in Hamburg. We have the full lineup of the IMPA SAVE Council, and we'll be building on some of these issues that Rasmus has raised, and this will be led by the chair of the IMPA SAVE, Mikael Karlsson. So that's scheduled for 3:30. It gives you half an hour, stretch your legs, clear your mind, have a cup of coffee, and then come back for our final session. Excited to do that. Thank you very much. Right, okay, welcome back. So this will be our final session of the day, and dare I say, perhaps, you know, the most important thing on our agenda to talk through the IMEF standard. The panelists for this final session today, this afternoon, are the IMPA SAVE Council. And I was thinking and talking to Mikael earlier, and I thought that it might be just worth my while spending 2 minutes telling you what the IMPA SAVE initiative is about. Because it's very familiar to people within IMPA, but you perhaps might not be fully aware of the strategy and the philosophy and the ideas and the work that this council is doing. So IMPA SAVE was formed during the pandemic when we were, Mikael and I, talking greatly about the need to really drive the sustainability agenda forward, to actually make change, to not just talk about the issues, but to actually put in place some practical initiatives and to take some action around this. And it had a greater philosophy to set out a forum to provide the practical and workable strategies and solutions for a sustainable procurement and supply chain management. So we'd provide guidelines, documentation, information, resources that will help both the buyer-supplier community to engage in sustainability and to talk about what to do and how to do it in a meaningful way. There is a reason why we chose IMPA SAVE as the initiative, and that title, the word SAVE, because, and this is where I'm going to disagree with Tina a little bit. She's looking at me now. Oh, yeah, yeah, yes, just a little, because I think that our feeling about sustainability is that, yes, we have to save the cost to the environment, but it isn't always about saving or costing more money. It is possible to save the cost to the environment whilst saving actual money. And probably the best example of this is reducing single-use plastic and putting in place water filtration systems. Jesper is here from Aquarex. Perfect example. Aquarex are a company that talk about saving significant cost in terms of plastic bottles, and there are other companies doing similar things. So actually, when it comes to sustainability, it's about thinking carefully about what you're buying and spending some time and energy and effort in the procurement process and practice, and you can actually save money as well as significantly saving costs. Tina did actually talk about this in terms of logistics and so on, and of course those that relates to saving cost. So really now my job is to hand over to Mikael, who is, just one more thing I want to mention, IMPA SAVE, the IMPA SAVE Council here, are volunteers. They are unpaid volunteers, people that are deeply passionate about the sustainability agenda. They're giving up their time and energy to do this for the benefit of all. And IMPA SAVE is for all, including buyers, suppliers, manufacturers, and everyone. So today is significant, and Mikael will explain far better than me, I'm sure, the IMEF Initiative and where we are with this. So I'll hand over to Mikael and go and sit down. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to this session. I don't think these people need introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. This is Paolo Magonio from Scorpio and Dorthe from Maersk, Rasmus from ReFlow, which you're already familiar with, and I'm Mikael from Northern Marine. You kind of stole my thunder a little bit here, but fine, Stephen. I kind of want to do a bold on then. IMPA SAVE was just an idea that then turned into a discovery. And then we got the data, Rasmus, on the life cycle and the emissions, and then we actually understood the impact. When we started IMPA SAVE, I built a bridge to the moon, I believe. And we've actually achieved saving over 100 million bottles annually already. And that's quite a significant number. And then again, I promised not to talk too much about IMPA SAVE, but now I am. History was made in this room last year. Actually, just a year from now, we sat here and I was asked a question on this very panel. What if we measure it? What if we came up with some system? And I couldn't release a thought. And right after the meeting, I spoke to these people here. Said, what if can we do this? And now we're here a year later with IMEF. So it was born in this very room by you guys because you're asking questions. So please ask questions today because it's a good thing, I found out. So it led to a new idea. And this concerns us all. It concerns you, me, your companies, and what we're doing. So I don't want to talk too much, so I'm just going to dive right into questions here. Rasmus, what is IMEF and why IEMF?
Let's. I thank you for the introduction. I'm IMEF, and I think it's really amazing that we are a year from like IMPA Hamburg a year ago. As you mentioned, based on the feedback we got, we were sitting here, same spot, based on the feedback we got from frustrated suppliers, frustrated manufacturers, saying, okay, we have a ship owner who is asking for data, but how do we know that we're supplying the right data? How do we know if the data we're supplying is actually meeting the demand of the ship owner? And how do we know if we're investing in a digital solution that it's the right one, that it's future-proof? And I think what we were talking about a year ago was all about the need for ship owners because we had this big EU initiative called Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And the ship owners were saying, well, we need to report on our supply chain emissions, also called Scope 3. And Scope 3 emissions is really made out of some of them is made out of everything that the ship owner is buying and sending to the vessels. So how do we actually know, what to report? We need this data from the suppliers and from whoever we are buying it from. And that's really what IMEF is all about, IMPA Maritime Environmental Footprint, what it's all about. It's about being able to have a standard and approach where you know how to make the right calculation using a method and a database structure which is already agreed upon within the maritime community. Because if you are a manufacturer or you are a ship owner, there is a lot of different ways you can do it. And with the IMEF, you get some guidelines on how to make a product carbon footprint to compliant enough. And I think that was the biggest challenge, is to figure out how do we make the calculation, not making it overcomplicated. So this is what IMEF is all about. It's a guideline on how to make a carbon footprint calculation on a product, and also how do you actually share that and what you actually share with your customer. That was a very long answer to a short question, Mikael.
Yeah, but this is complicated. And also, I want to add one of the things, and why we came up with this was also because, and I think, Peter, you mentioned it earlier, most suppliers are asked to have 3 different qualities of the very same product on stock. And we figured out, when we were talking about this last year in Hamburg, that, wow, what if Maersk and Scorpio, Stena, starts asking about different methodologies to measure this? You got spend-based, you got activity-based. I mean, no one can figure out what's being reported. So the whole idea is that we come together, people in this room and outside this room, and agreeing on a standard, so IMO doesn't come running in a year or 2 and says, guys, now you got to do this. So let's help them a little bit to make the right decision when we get there. So that's really what's behind it. This is why it concerns us all. So we're not sitting here setting up new rules. We need everybody on board. We need everybody coming up with the input. So we measure the same way, with the same structure behind it, with the same processes behind. Which leads to my next question. Paolo, what are you doing today in all these emissions forests?
Thank you for the question. I think I relate a lot to Tina's presentation earlier on, right? So when we are saying we don't know, so what we're doing today in terms of Scope 3 emissions is mainly focused on this initiative, where we're trying to set the standards and to design the avenue and the highway on which we could collect this data in a consistent, clear and transparent way, because that will help us to move from the we don't know to the actually we know. So I think this initiative is very critical in defining the standards, defining the way this data could be collected by the vendors, certified, and then passed on to our side, which will allow then to take informed decision. And will allow also the suppliers to take informed decision, because today we don't know. I mean, today we assume an item is more environmentally friendly than another item. We assume that the vendor is more environmentally friendly than another vendor, but on the basis of certain parameters which are not factual, which are not necessarily transferred to the items. I mean, you can be a vendor with solar panel on your warehouse and driving electric vehicles, but then purchasing items which are actually produced in a non-environmental way. So that doesn't make that particular item better than another item. So having the actual factual information on the emission of a particular product will allow buyers and vendors to purchase or to take the decision, like Tina mentioned. Do we want to take the environmental decision? Is this list of items producing less emission and costing more? This will also lead to a lot of surprises. Like Stephen mentioned, it is not the equation that environmental green equal more dollars. Most of the time is wrong. I mean, the water initiative has shown that. So I think it's what we're doing is focusing on this initiative and pressing on in order to make sure that this information will be available and commonly shared, and that will lead then to us from the buyer side to be able to do something for the environment in the long term.
Thank you, Paolo. And Dorthe, where's Maersk in this?
Well, we have a, I know, sorry. We have a very clear goal in Maersk to be zero neutral in 2040. So this is just the normal, obvious way of going down that road. I remember first time I was at the IMPA, I had an eye-opener with Rasmus when he said, as soon as you have eliminated your scope 1, we will proceed to scope 3. And I said, oh, shit, we need to start working on this. And then you can also, I mean, how far have we come? Obviously not far enough, but we are trying to do the right thing. In Maersk currently, right now, we are measuring our first mile emissions. We have cleared our catalog, and all suppliers are requested to put in, if they have it, first mile, flown, non-flown, shipped, where has it been delivered to, and stuff like that. So we have that data. We will have the same procurement system as Scorpio, Mariapps, and we are discussing with them on what kind of fuels do we need. We need, of course, something for the PCF, product carbon footprint, in there. Then we are having all the discussions with our supplier, first with a survey that we have sent out, finding out how mature are they in this entire supply chain, if they judge them by themselves, and then we are having interviews as well. It's quite interesting to have supplier meetings, because I've never once experienced that a supplier is coming to me with something without me actually starting that discussion myself. So what's happening? What are your thoughts? What are you doing right now? And then I like, Paolo, that you said that thing about the solar panels. That is the first thing that everybody will say, we have solar panels on the roof. I like that. It's not to say anything about that, but we need to have some data. So this initiative with IMEF is, of course, to help us all, help each other to start measuring what we are doing. Without doing that, we cannot proceed any further.
I think just to touch base on the solar panel talk, I'll just throw it in there, right? Because being a company and saying, okay, now we're going to get solar panels without actually knowing the impact of the greener electricity in your products. Many times you don't even know it. You invest in the solar panels. We have had several of those where we calculate the emissions or the carbon intensity of the new electricity from the panels, right? And then once you add that into the carbon footprint, you will see that it's only 3% of the entire emissions of this product, for example. And then they're like, oh, we thought it was much more, right? And I think that's the whole idea about the IMEF initiative, is that once you start putting numbers on your products, you will actually also have enough data to actually say, where do we actually start in decarbonizing? Where do we actually start? And I think this is also where saying, once you have the data, you also know where to put your investments, where you get maximum output out of it. And this is what it's all about, is saying, use as little as possible to get the best savings, both financially but also environmental.
And I also want to add something to this. The discussed IMEF, it's not something we're going to have an answer for this year, next year. It's going to be ongoing with everybody on board. And it's not about, let's report as much as we can tomorrow. Because if your supplier you're competing with is not doing that, then your emissions go through the roof. So it's also a matter of start crawling before we walk, and then we run, and then we go for a full sprint. And it might take 10 years to do it. The challenge is just that the 1st of January this year, we are asked to report scope 3 emissions. So my question is, who's ready for that in this audience? Hands up. Then my second question will be, are you working towards it? Hands up. And now my question, what are you doing about it? Anyone? Tell us what you're doing.
The easy one is just saying, we're asking our suppliers, right?
No one?
Yeah, which I think, Rasmus, it's a very valid point. I mean, let's make sure we repeat here again. This initiative is not about each of you spending millions of dollars in going around and calculating the emissions of the products you're selling. The majority of the vendors in this room and in the maritime industry are resellers. So there is nothing wrong in going to your sub-vendors and ask them to report the emissions, because the majority of the vendors on the second line are already serving other industries. They are already calculating their own emissions on their products. They are already reporting those emissions. So it's the first step for suppliers is, one, don't panic. Two, prepare your ERP systems to be able to store and transfer this information once you get it. If you don't have it, you will not be able to report it. There is nothing wrong. We will calculate it on a spend basis. If you have it and you receive it from your vendors, you store it and you pass it on. The pressure in turning from the spend basis to the activity basis is to remove the absurdity that if we buy a product which is more expensive, if you're using the spend basis solution, that actually will say that the product is generating more emissions. So if we go to a vendor and buy something which is environmental friendly, etc., which has a higher cost, the Scope 3 emission will increase. Whether if that product not only is green, but is also associated to the real emission on an activity basis point of view, that will not only show that there is a certain variation on the cost, but it also shows that there is a variation on the emissions. So the pressure would be for the benefit of the vendors in reporting the activity based, but it's not a matter to panic. It's just a matter to go out to the sub-suppliers and ask this information. If it's there, good. If it's not there, no problem. We will continue calculating. We expect that maybe this year we will have 1% of the emission calculated on the activity basis and 99% will be on the spend basis. And over the next few years, while the maturity of the supply chain system increase, we will have a higher percentage of activity based. But that's as simple as is.
And just for everybody's knowledge, we put together a working group with over 20 people. I think we're way over 20 people right now. All from suppliers to owners, manufacturers, other organizations. We got ESA on board as well. We got Carl right down there representing them. We got ERP systems on board, platforms on board. So trying to get the whole ecosystem together. And it's not like we don't want to drive this to overwhelm everyone. And sometimes it's just about starting with a category, something like that. So this is why we need everybody to get engaged. You can't hide because this is ongoing, this is happening. Rasmus, how do we calculate this?
It's a good question. I think one of the ambitions we have right now with IMEF, that is not to accelerate too fast to make it too complicated. One of the goals is that we get down the line the whole life cycle of the product. And that was back to what Paolo mentioned, is saying, if we buy better quality, how do we actually show that it will last longer? How does that benefit the environment? Now, better quality, if you compare that through the entire life cycle of the product, you can say, well, if you buy a lower quality product and you say the total lifespan of the vessel might be 20 years, you'll have to substitute the lower quality more times than the better quality. And that will both cost money, but also cost on the environmental side of it. And that's the perfect scenario. That's where we want to be with the IMEF initiative down the line, is to have so much data that we can actually make the right decisions. But we're not there yet. And I think it's very important to say we're going to start very, very small. And what we have in the initiative right now is just what's called cradle to gate. And that means we're just calculating everything up to leaving the factory. And why do we do that? Well, the idea is that we're going to start there, because if we add more, we will make it more complicated and involve more data suppliers like the logistics firms and so on. And then it can get complicated. So let's start small, cradle to gate. And the way we have designed the initiative right now is to say, well, there is a description on the materials that goes in. You can actually add that very simple into a spreadsheet. You can either make it yourself, or we are here in the in the IMEF initiative actually working on making a template available so you can actually go in and at least start the calculation yourself. And you'll add this, you'll say, this is the amount of steel I've used, this is the amount of electricity from this country I've used, these are the logistics to the factory, and so on. Once you have all the ingredients or the bill of material represented into the calculation, you can also add some waste or other parameters that you have in your production. Once you have that, then you make the calculation, you sum up all the emissions, and then you will have a product carbon footprint in what's called cradle to gate. And that number you can then provide on in the value chain. And naturally, that takes data. And I think if you're a reseller, you don't necessarily have the bill of materials that goes into the production, and that is a problem. That's also why we in the IMEF working group is focusing on making documentation or letters that you can pass on to your supply chain, asking for the right data. So you don't have to invent it, but you can just pass on this document or an email to the next party and next party and next party. And I think also it's important to say in the IMEF initiative, we have not reinvented something. We are complying with different standards and so on. So we're basically just referring to existing standards. So it's not brand new for many of the manufacturers. They should see it from other industries as well.
And I think it's important what you said here in the end is that we're trying to produce a document in a working group that we want all suppliers worldwide to use. So we are asking the same questions and then hopefully by that reporting the same, at least we're trying to. That's the whole key behind it. I saw a few hands before of people getting some work done. Does anybody care to tell us what you're doing? Tell the crowd what you're doing or have done?
I think I can speak up. All right. So we basically identified a number of products based on how much we're selling. I'm working in a ship channel. So
It will. Keep talking.
there we go. So I'm working at a ship chandler, and we've basically identified a number of products that we sell the most, where we've started dialogues with suppliers, but we're also looking at the logistics part already to try to capture the full picture from production up until it's in our warehouse, and then we combine it with our own emissions.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I just make a quick comment? I think it's great that you have the logistics part of it. Good advice is to make sure you keep that separate in the calculation when you share it. So you ensure that whoever you're sharing with know it's an add-on. It's just so it doesn't get lost in translation. We have seen that, but it's great. Yeah, amazing.
I think it's okay. Okay. Oh yeah, thank you. I think it's a very important aspect, and we are working on that as well as we try to implement the cradle-to-cradle principle in shipping. And there are data tools already available since nearly 30 years in the automotive industry, in the electronics industry, because many suppliers are really fed up with the compliance documentation. And there are tools around which offer, based on full material declarations throughout the entire supply chain, including emission calculations and so on, all sorts of compliance documents, fully traceable, and if one supplier in the chain detects an error, it's automatically transmitted to all the other, let's say, buyers along the chain. So it is a big effort. But the positive aspect is that we are not only talking about the nasty stuff like CO2 emissions, about hazardous materials, this is where I'm coming from, we also talk about valuables. And that's the foundation for implementing the cradle-to-cradle principle. We are in a 3-year research project active at the moment. It is challenging, but if there is a supplier or manufacturer happy to participate in that, please give me your card, and I would be more than happy to discuss this further with you.
Anybody else?
And just a quick comment again here. I think it's great with the different initiatives like Cradle to Cradle. I think the challenge here is it costs money and time, and I think we need to, and that's also the thought with the IMF, is let's keep it to the minimum in the beginning and then build on complexity. But if you are already able to work on the higher level like Cradle to Cradle, that's it's great. But hopefully your data will also be compatible with the IMF, because that's the whole idea. The Cradle to Gate is the simplest part of it, right? And then you'll add the complexity and environmental aspects later on.
More hands? There we go. Brave.
Friday from Muscat. We have some very simple things we are doing. We are using, we don't use plastic wrapping when we deliver our products. We deliver recycling tarpaulins, which are QA codes, and we are managing the logistics. So we ensure that the tarpaulins, they come back to the hub again, and if not, delivered in another port. So we have a platform where we are managing the logistic behind these tarpaulins. Another thing is to count the number. That's this very simple thing. Count the number of trucks going to a vessel. Try to consolidate. If you're used to have 6 trucks going to the vessel and you will only see 3 next time, you have reduced the emission with 50%. It's very simple. So we do a lot on the logistics side, which is the most obvious thing to start up with, I think, and simple, and not trying to go back to the production source and see how this product has been. We should also do that, but there is some very obvious things we can do, and specifically the tarpaulins is really working, and we save tons of single-use plastic per year.
Thanks.
I think it's a. Now I'm just making all these comments, and I hope it's okay. I think it's a great initiative. I think the challenge we see with many initiatives is to get the data to actually show that it is a good initiative, and that's also the experience we got with the IMPA SAVE with the plastic bottles, is having actually the numbers saying, okay, 345 bottles is really the return on investment for the water filtration machine. That's, wow, that's something we can all relate to, and that's also, I think, where we need to go also with the IMF, if we can use that as a framework to make these compelling arguments to do this instead of that down the line. So you would be able down the line to say, now you have saved X amount of CO2 because you have recycled this 300 times now. That would be amazing, right? Because that's playing right down to the ship owners' environmental reporting and so on.
Anyone else that cares to share?
We started in Maersk some years ago buying more and more locally. And we thought, well, if we have a vessel that's calling Asia and Europe, why transport it around if it's produced in Asia? And what we found out was that if you're buying in Asia, you're also buying American products, you're even buying European products. So this about asking country of origin for everything is it just makes good sense. And since we are shipping, we are also not, we're not against shipping via sea freight, obviously, but we want to avoid all the air freights. So, but it's just good to know. And if we can buy an Asian product in Asia, why not do so? But knowledge is power.
Yeah, a couple of quick points. So Patrick, 7C's good to start collecting this information. Then I think I repeat, the next step is making the ERP systems ready to receive, store, and pass on this information. That's key, because the information without circulation of information is worth nothing. On your point on the logistics and the initiatives, but this is the way we have been working over the last few years. So we're taking actions which make sense because it's common sense. It's clear that 3 trucks is better than 6. But what we are missing is actually the information. By reducing the trucks from 6 to 3, how much are we reducing the emissions of the logistics of that particular vessel? Because the 3 trucks can be having on board 10 different air freight shipments. And if the air freight shipment is generating 100 times the emission of the truck, actually it's much better to have 10 shipments on 10 air freights going on 10 trucks than having 20 air freights going on 3 trucks. So having the information, and this initiative is about bringing to light what is already there, so that once we know, we can take informed decision. And then we can decide whether, of course, if we can reduce the air freight from 20 to 10 and the trucks from 6 to 3, it's obvious we have made advantage, but how much? What is the emission generated by maybe something else that we are doing on the ship on that particular call, which may be 10 times the emission generated by the logistics. I mean, what is the emission generated by a barge delivery compared to a truck or compared to an incoming air freight? We don't know, and this is relating to what we were saying before. So first step, let's get to know and lay down the information. And then every company will have the ability, buyers and vendors, to take their decision informed on the basis of the data.
And I could comment to that, Paolo. I also think it's important to know what is the end goal of the ship owner. Why is it this important? Why is it they want to pay probably more for greener products? I think the notion is, yes, they want to do that. But why is it? If you take a company like Maersk, you mentioned, Dorthe, you have a net zero ambition or goal, right? So what net zero actually means is that you will have to decarbonize your supply chain and your fuel all the way down to where you can't do it anymore. And then you have to pay quotas or certificates for the last portion. And that comes with a premium. And it's the difference between those quotas, certificates, decarbonization certificates, and paying a little bit extra for a better, greener product. The difference between that will be the premium that they're willing to pay. They always want to pay a little bit more, but if you have the numbers as a supplier saying, based on what you are going to buy of decarbonization credits down the line, we can probably decarbonize 2 tons for this cost. You'll pay a little bit more on this product. So that's really the end game and the math that we are up towards once the data is there. And I think that should also be a driver for everybody in the room to say, okay, so we're not losing orders, but we are getting probably a better reward on getting, greener products down the line. And that's the end goal. Just so everybody is aligned that many of those ship owners with these net zero ambitions are willing to pay more, and that's why.
And then I was just listening to you now, and I was looking up here. These are the companies that stepped behind us and just said, we want to throw our hat in here and give input to how we can do this together. And I'm inviting everyone here to join. It's free to join. It's free to give support, and we're doing this for you. We're doing it for all of you and the companies you represent. So this is just to jump on. And also on IMPA SAVE. I know there's companies in here that's not part of IMPA SAVE. Get on IMPA SAVE. It doesn't cost you anything. In fact, it saves you money. And it's good for our environment. I just had to throw it out there.
I have a question, actually. So how... I cannot stop talking about today, I'm sorry. So I have a question. So how we can make sure as a ship owner when we are trying to comply and such as, and of course our suppliers have to comply as well. How can we make sure that this is not only greenwashing? Simple as that. They can invent something. Is there something in place how we can make sure
that the data given are really the real data and not only just hanky-panky business?
And that's a very good, spot-on observation there. How do we know if it's not greenwashing? And I think when is something greenwashing? Let's go back to when is something greenwashing? That can be if you are using it for marketing and not telling the truth. It can also be if you can't substantiate what you're saying. There is a lot of different definitions on greenwashing. What our ambition with IMEF in the working group is right now is not having data you are going to use for marketing or communication yet. The whole ambition of IMEF is the lowest possible ambition, and that is to join forces to put some basic standards, some basic approaches that everybody can afford to follow, and then build on top of that. So if you look at the draft that we have right now, it actually says that you cannot use it for anything else than reporting. You cannot use this data for marketing, comparing products, or anything. And that's simply because it lacks the full picture. It lacks the entire life cycle of the product that we talked about, but it also lacks verification, right? So these two elements are not there. And then the last thing it lacks is something called a functional unit. And that means if you're a pump, you need to have the same function on the pump, saying you have to pump 1 cubic meter, through certain characteristics, because then you can compare apples and apples. We don't have that yet because that's adding complexity. And that's making it more expensive for everybody to join forces. So we have to start somewhere. But to answer your questions, verification, functional unit, and a full life cycle aspect.
So I guess it's an EU initiative. So it's by law at one point that this has to be declared. If you look at food, for instance, there's a declaration on each package you buy in the supermarket, and there are probably some controls in place with public institutions that do some testing of whether it's correct that this candy bar contains only 2 grams of sugar and stuff like that. Are you aware of any control measures that the EU has put in place similar to make sure that the carbon footprint being registered or being declared by the manufacturers are actually correct?
Yeah, so the whole thing about EU is that they cannot enforce things. The local countries can enforce things. So EU doesn't have an environmental police, but each country will have an ombudsman or something who can take the complaints, or a verification body who can verify. So what EU is doing is they're saying, well, we have some guidelines, but it's up to the single countries to verify and to enforce. And that's both good and bad, because it also gives room for interpretations for the different countries. We are not there there are guidelines for greenwashing from EU, and they're being tightened as we speak. However, the guidance for verification are not put in stone yet. So they have some wording in the law saying, well, you have to make sure it's reasonably verified and blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't say you have to go to this verification body to get this stamp yet. And that's simply because that no country will, it will be so expensive for everybody to get that stamp. But they're rolling it in, but it's still something that has to be trialed in a court if it gets to that, and then you'll have to have the evidence. So there are no verification stamps you can get yet, unfortunately. But EU does have something called Product Environmental Footprint that they're working on, PEF. And it's also our hope with the IMEF Initiative that we can align as much as possible down the line, so we don't invent something and we can align with existing initiatives. But again, it's also a cost barrier for the small manufacturer somewhere that suddenly can't afford to supply products that are probably green, but they can't afford the documentation. So that's a good thing about being ahead of the game as we are in the maritime industry. We are a small industry right now because EU has focused on clothing, raw materials, apparel, aluminum, steel, batteries, stuff like that is big for the consumer. But we are left behind a little bit, and that gives us time to actually learn the ropes and actually unite together and have an initiative that we can scale up together.
Yeah, Christoph again from Achilles. I don't want to do advertising for Achilles, but there are providers like we and other providers. Coming to your question, Tina, we are collecting data from suppliers. So we are asking suppliers for invoices related to energy consumption. We are asking them for certificates and so on. And this is done not only by Achilles, also other providers do this for companies in energy, in shipping, and everywhere else. And then we check this information and the certificates, and AI is checking it and so on. Is it true? Could it be true and real information? And there is a very high score that shows it is true and real information. But what you can do in addition is you can also do for sure audits and can audit the supplier if you think it's necessary. This is what we also provide and other providers provide as well. Will you get a 100% guarantee? I think you never get it, but you can really get very nearby.
Should I say something? I say so much, but I think one thing is a caution saying it's great with vetting the suppliers, but having a verified environmentally compliant supplier doesn't mean that the products that they supply are naturally better. The data will need to show on product level if it is better or not. But it's part of the process because you also need to make sure that they have all these activities in order. So it has to be a combination, I believe, in order to be effective.
Yeah, the reality is that at the transactional level, measuring the emissions of each individual item, it's much more important than rating the vendor in itself, because the rating of the vendor is something which is consistent over time, can be changed by certain initiatives, but it doesn't, especially when you're talking about ship chandlers. I mean, there is a huge difference in supply one day an extinguisher or another extinguisher. These extinguishers are not manufactured by the ship chandler. The ship chandler is buying it from somebody else. Is it buying it from somebody which is using coal-generated energy and steel, which is coming from high-intense water consumption, energy-intense production, or is it coming from a sub-supplier which is using all different initiatives? So if we rate the suppliers which are just resellers, we risk to really not see the reality which is behind. So like when we measure in Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, the Scope 1 and Scope 2 of the vendors we are dealing with today, it's very limited. And the whole is coming from the Scope 3. So we need to be really aware of this and not to confuse the two things, which it's very important to deal with vendors which has proper rating in terms of governance, in terms of labor, child labor, sanction, etc., that is a given. But when you deal with those vendors, then you need to be able to understand what they are selling to you, especially when you are dealing with wholesalers, which just go out in the market and search for us what we need. So that's very important.
Speaking about Scope 1 to Scope 3.
Yeah.
So are we really moving into saying, are we changing the whole paradigm of wholesalers who are just sourcing randomly? Are we really looking at now we need to know your suppliers a little bit better? Is that really where we're going? What do you think?
This is a consequence, right? Because the moment that the suppliers themselves, they see the actual data and they say, oh, this extinguisher is 30 kilos of CO2, this extinguisher is 1 kilo of CO2, and the price is actually probably the same, then that vendor will take the decision of sourcing constantly and consistently from a sub-vendor which has the lower emission provided that the price is very similar and is giving them better visibility. And the same will happen to us from the buyer side. I mean, Tina's team will see a long list of consumables from 2 vendors, which is likely in the end a 4 months consumable, and in the end the cost is roughly the same, but one will be dramatically 20% less in terms of emissions. And this is where a company which has as a target to reduce emissions will obviously take the decision. So this is shifting, this is a paradigm shift in a way, which is not removing the availability cost, but is also adding a third parameter in the arena. And this is where I think we have been sitting here with vendors just saying, oh, you guys just source the cheapest one, and you don't see the quality. I mean, actually now we're going to see the quality. We're going to measure the quality in terms of environmental impact and in terms of life cycle. So this is actually should be welcome, because companies sourcing responsibly and having the proper visibility and taking the right decision will see more business coming to them.
That's why transparency becomes very important, Paolo. And I think the buyer, you should require transparency through the whole supply chain, right? So, because this is not something we are used to in our business, yeah?
Yeah, it's not a short process. I mean, it's going to take years. So what we're saying here, let's get prepared. Let's have the view of what is going to come, and let's start collecting the information. It's true. I mean, is it going to be greenwashing? At the beginning, it's going to be difficult, but the majority of the companies will have in their quality management system the fact that they need to trace and collect this information. The standards is going to develop. There will be a Lloyd register or DNV or RINA certificate which witness that the company is collecting data from his sub-suppliers, and you will probably buy from companies which will provide you, instead of the ship wheel, we will have a certificate which says that actually the emissions that they are reporting are correct and measured according to certain ISO standards, etc. It is all going to come, and it's going to be driven by money again, because if we are going to report higher emission, we're going to pay tax on those emissions. So the equation, emission, money is already there. So in order to pay less tax on the emission, we need to lower the emission. First, we need to see what the emissions are, and then we need to take decisions in a balanced way between the dollars of the product and the dollars that this product is generating in terms of tax. So it's an equation which is going to be obviously there, and the transparency and visibility of this information will come in play and will come in tow.
Thank you, Paolo. We are drawing to a close. I got one question more, but before I state that, again, everyone can be part of this. It doesn't cost you money, and it's probably a good idea to follow a close eye on what we're trying to do here and be on the same wagon as everyone else. So come talk to Rasmus, Paolo, or Dorthe, or anyone else, Stephen, Jasmine, Susan, and you as well. One question I have for my panel, but also for everyone in the audience. Where do you think we are next year when we're back in Hamburg? We came from idea to HIS, so where are we 1 year?
I think it's amazing how far we've gotten so far. It's not because I want to say good things about our work. I think what is the most amazing part is that we succeeded joining so many companies representing the entire value chain in such a short time, from idea to action. I think from my side, the hope is for next year that we have defined the digital, how do we actually share the data? How do we make it easy to make the calculation? I think if we can do that, then we actually are a very good spot, because now we can actually let the data flow, we can calculate it, and then get more companies to actually make calculations. I think we should probably send out a survey before the next Hamburg IMPA meeting, and then say how many have actually start working on something. And then that could be a good idea, to actually make some numbers in our next meeting, say, where were you and where are you now? And then perhaps people who shared can actually have their answers up there if they want to. I don't know. It's an idea.
Paolo?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I will set, let's say, a challenging target. I mean, this year we reported Scope 3 emissions 100% on spend basis. So we said we spend $1 million in tools, $1 million in tools equal to so many tons of CO2 emissions. So my challenge and my target for next year is to see that at least between 3 and 5% of the emission we will report for 2025 will be activity-based. But this is actually only depending on, one, putting in place the system for suppliers to report onto us, and then suppliers collecting this information. So let's see. But I will be happy with 1% as well.
Dorthe?
And I'm maybe a little bit more apprehensive. I'll just like that some of the suppliers will start having discussions with us regarding this so that we can pave the road together.
Anyone else have any last thoughts on this?
Pertaining to what you said, the single source of truth, you have to involve the system makers to make space for this to be included, because that process alone will also take a long time. It has to go parallelly. They actually have to start now.
And I think before we can do that, we need to agree on what should be included, because it's not just a number, right? There is also what type of data is it? Is it verified? What are the data source? All these different areas, I think that should also be focused on or an idea for focus on the working group, so we can agree on that. So we don't put in the wrong areas inside our systems, all of us, because we really have the ambition. So let's also focus on that for the coming year. It's a good idea.
Yeah, good input, Peter. And also why the group is so big, so we don't miss anything on the way, and then all of a sudden, hey, you forgot that. We'll probably forget something, but we'll try not to. So just join, support, and if you want to engage yourself, just come talk to us. I think there's a drinks reception afterwards, and yeah, Stephen, maybe you just take over, tell us what to do.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, first of all, thank you very much to our panel, the IMPA SAVE Council, and thank you to you. That was perfect, so thank you very much. So the work is done, which is wonderful. So thank you to all of you for joining today. It's not over, but the program as such is over. We will have a drinks reception out here for a little while, an hour or so, for some networking opportunities, and then 6 o'clock will be a further drinks reception on the rooftop bar that I'm imagining probably most people are familiar with. I think it's called 20 Up, isn't it? Yeah. So I'm guessing it's the 20th floor, isn't it? Yeah. God, figure that out. When you go up there tonight, your sort of entry pass is your name badge. So when you leave here now, don't discard that. You will need it to go up there later. But there's an hour or so here first before they prepare it and allow us up there. So that's from 6 o'clock. There is the IMEF closed session, the working group meeting. That is being held now, or we've delayed it actually till 5 o'clock. So we've just told the online participants, it's in the room opposite. So if you're joining that, it's through this networking area and then in the other room out there. So that's going to start at 5 o'clock. So if you can be prompt, because we've got some online participants. Just before we go, we have a bottle of champagne with some business cards just to draw out of the champagne bucket. Is Mikael here from ShipServe? This was ShipServe Initiative. Can you pick us out a business card, Mikael, and then somebody's going to have a nice evening. Probably needs chilling, but... Yeah? Tina, are you, what? Are you collecting this or, huh? Ah, well, I think it's clear that Tina should be taking on his behalf and possibly passing it on. But look, we're not going to tell him, Tina, if you don't. Too late. I'm Spartacus. Okay, so listen, just a final closing to say thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to all the panelists, to our sponsors, to our participants, to everybody that is involved with doing this. It's not over, as I said. Now we can relax and enjoy each other's company. But thank you again, and that's IMPA Hamburg.